Hello, everyone. Good afternoon at the Aspen Ideas Festival. I'm really excited for this conversation. And I've already seen we have it's a really wonderful expert audience. So I promise we are going to leave time at the end to hear from all of you. We are here, of course, with Tony Fadell, AKA the Podfather, the inventor of the iPod, co-inventor of the iPhone, co-founder of Nest, and now his best bio line, the New York Times best-selling author of Build. Tony will be autographing books afterwards. So before we get into our conversation, which is going to cover all kinds of things, we have a birthday today.
We absolutely have a birthday today.
When I woke up this morning, my son told me that we had a birthday, and without even knowing that I was going to be talking to you, so why don't you tell everyone what birthday we have?
Well, today is the exact 15-year anniversary of the first iPhone shipping to people in stores.
And that's it?
That's it. This is the first one, and it's kind of changed a lot in 15 years, if you can see. It's amazing how small it is, right? Even the iPhone mini today, there is an iPhone mini, is not even this small. So, this was supposed to be an iPod replacement, not a computer in your pocket. But it's amazing, 15 years and what's happened, not just from the hardware perspective, but how society has changed all around the world.
How did people get them? There weren't Apple stores 15 years ago, or there were?
No, there were Apple stores 15 years ago, but the iPhones were only available in the US, and they were still limited quantity because it wasn't around the world. So people were smuggling iPhones like into Hong Kong. Like we had to go and tamp down all of this stuff because people were truly like going crazy for this thing.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
that's
amazing.
Crazy.
Yeah.
You know what I realized? I was so excited to talk to you, I didn't introduce myself. I'm David Leonhardt with the New York Times. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, so the iPhone birthday is actually a really nice little pivot here. So at one of the earlier sessions this week, Walter Isaacson was asked what sort of distinguishes inventors, innovators, people who change the world. And he said, it's not about intelligence. There are a lot of smart people. There are a lot of really, really smart people. And I'm not going to get the quote exactly right. I hope Walter will forgive me, but it's that what distinguishes people who innovate and invent are people who can think differently, think outside the box, to use the cliche.
Right.
And so, first of all, I'm interested in you've been involved in some of these great inventions. I'm interested in if you agree with that basic diagnosis, and I'm also interested for all of us what you think the lesson is, how you think all of us can learn to think a little bit differently in our own lives and try to improve on some of the things, whether it's in our work or our own life or anything that we care about.
Sure. Well, the way I think about and when I went back and writing the book, because there's a chapter on that actually, was looking back, it really came down to, one, understanding and seeing problems that most people didn't see, right? So it was about noticing. The first thing is noticing. I have a TED Talk on this. And what you have to do is you have to stay beginner. When there are certain things in the world when we go out and we do, the first time we do it, whatever that is, we go, oh, that's not right. And you're like, ugh. And then after you do it a couple of days or a few days, you habituate away those kinds of pains that you had when you were starting to use something or adopting it in your life. And what you have to do when you're building something or creating something is you have to tap into those earliest days for people to remind them, what I call the virus of doubt. Remind them of those things. Remind yourself first of what those pain points are if they're habituated or if we have them every day. And then what you do is then you try to bring a painkiller to those pain points. So literally, I do not like products or services or all those things that are vitamins. We don't need vitamins. Everybody can get vitamins, but today I'll take them, maybe. But painkillers, if there's pain and you can remember there's pain, solving and giving a painkiller, and hopefully it turns into a superpower, that is when you know you have a great product. And that's the first thing. But it's really that noticing that detail and trying to figure it out. So let's talk about the pain for the iPhone, right? I was at a company called General Magic. And that General Magic was in 1991, 1994. We were trying to make the iPhone 15 years too early. The original Mac team, minus Steve, created a company called General Magic. There's a documentary about this. And what we had at the time, this was before the internet, before people really had mobile phones, before there was Wi-Fi or any of this other stuff, shopping online, any of this stuff. We created a device, and was shipped by Sony and Motorola and all these other things, these companies that we're partnered with. And we had downloadable games, and we had email. Most people didn't even know what email was in 1992, 93. We had online shopping and mobile communications. We had all of that. We had emojis. We actually had emojis and animated ones back then. All of that stuff in 1993, 1994. And it was the most spectacular failure you could imagine of a company. It was a total failure. We had, I think it was spent in total between all of it in 93, 94, $750 million was lost building this thing, okay, and shipping it. And we only sold about 3,000 to 4,000 of them in total. And it went to our friends. Our friends bought them. And the people who were like working on it. No one else bought it because why? We were solving pain, like email and stuff like that, mobile email, when people didn't have the pain. So the technology wasn't right. It was not right timing for society. It wasn't until the iPhone came out when we knew we had Wi-Fi, we had internet for browsing and looking up information, shopping. People knew what the iPhone pain was, the iPhone pain was solving, right? What were we solving for? We were solving for an iPod, because everybody knew what mobile entertainment was. They knew what mobile communications was, and they knew what communications and productivity. And so we put those all in one device. Before, you had to take your laptop, you had to take your iPod, and you had to take your mobile phone. And that was the pain that we were solving for.
And so tell me more about what you mean that there wasn't pain around email. Email couldn't solve pain in 1993. Was it because we weren't connected enough?
Yeah, most people didn't even have, they might have had inter-office email, but they didn't have email between different corporations. We weren't always on. I remember my sleep pattern changing. I slept perfectly all the time until I was starting to email with people around the world, in Japan, specifically with Sony, with that General Magic device, because they could start reading my emails in the middle of the night and start sending me a reply, and I could wake up and then start working. Before we had international connections on a network,
it wasn't.
You could wake up and there was nothing there because no one was interacting with you because they were all sleeping because they were basically on the same time zone.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to some of the downsides of ubiquitous digital technology, which is a subject Tony's thought a lot about. It's interesting when you talk about noticing. When I hear you talk about that, it actually reminds me of the concept of empathy. That you're saying that to invent something great, to change things, you really have to put yourself in the position of other people and try to think about how do they view this and get out of your head as I'm in this business and I already have all these assumptions and I know about it, and take yourself kind of back to the beginning. Is that a fair summary?
Absolutely. And what I always say, and empathy is a great word for it, but what I always say to the team to make it really simple, most of us geeks, we put together different whats together, but we don't think about the whys because we think we already know what the whys are intrinsically. We're like, well, put those two things together and they're cool. But you really have to start with the why and then put technology in service of that why, of that pain that you're solving or what have you. Most companies in Silicon Valley around the world, I have a firm now called FutureShape. We invest in 200 disruptive technology companies around the world. And a lot of those teams, what they're doing is just working on the what, not on the why. And we have to work with them on, let's tease out, why does this matter? And that's the big thing. Voice of the customer. Staying beginner, putting yourself in their shoes and really designing for them and giving them a superpower. At General Magic, what we were doing was we were designing for the geek in the cube next to us. We were trying to impress each other. With the iPhone or the iPod, Nest for that matter, what we were trying to do is bring superpowers to homeowners. So they could control, in Nest, control their thermostat from wherever, and it was really simple, and they could even install it themselves. We were always trying to bring superpowers to individuals, not impress other geeks.
And I just think there are lessons there for so many different industries, right? I mean, I promise I'm not going to turn this into a journalism panel, but one of the things that I most talk about to young people at the New York Times about is really constantly think about what the reader knows and doesn't know and what the reader needs to know. Because as journalists, we end up learning much more than we need to tell our readers. We have many more facts they don't need to know. And it's actually hard to put yourself back in the position of a reader and strip out all the stuff. And so what we often end up doing is we write stories for the geeks in the cubicle next to us, right? The journalists.
Exactly. I want to impress them. I want to win whatever prize it is, Pulitzer, whatever it's going to be. But the way I think of it and the way I've changed my process since that disaster of General Magic is that, when you create a movie, you create a treatment. And a movie treatment is you talk about who the audience is, you talk about the characters, you talk about the story arcs, you talk about the highs and lows, the setting, all those things. In the technology world, what I push our teams and even the companies we invest in is to write the press release before you start the project. You write the press release so you have that Occam's razor. You have that really clear, concise 1 or 1.5 pages of exactly what you're trying to do so you don't get into feature creep. You don't get into the geek speak. These kinds of things so that you can really understand, like, oh, we need these 4 features and those things have to work really well. All that other stuff can wait. Most times when you work with other geeks, they just want to keep adding and adding and adding and adding and go, oh, isn't it better? We'll add one more thing. But most people can't absorb more than 3 or 4 really new dramatic innovations and try to adopt them into their life.
And writing the press release essentially forces you to focus on what is the fundamental thing we're doing here. And
exactly. Get really, really clear. Distill it down to because that's what you're going to have to do at the end. And most of us, in these startups, they do the what, and then the last 2 months they bring in marketing and say, now tell a story. Tell a story and sell it to everyone. And they're like, why are we doing this? What's it for? Who's it for? And that should have been considered well earlier on.
Yeah.
And typically what happens is when the product comes out, and you see this all the time, so I think you might have saw Magic Leap. Magic Leap was AR glasses or Google Glass.
Yeah.
These kinds of things. We're hearing about it in the metaverse now. Marketing tells this story, but it's a fictional story when people actually get the product. They say all these great things. You're like, yeah, that sounds awesome. And you get the product, you go, what the hell is this? There's such dissonance. You're like, why am I doing this? Why am I there? And then you piss off the early adopters so much that it just becomes a DOA kind of product, right? And that's what happened with General Magic. That's what happened with Google Glass. That's what's happening with a lot of things that you're seeing coming out of Meta or saying there's going to come out of Meta. So these kinds of things. So the reason why I know this stuff is because I failed and we failed as a team at General Magic so dramatically, and it was so crushing to me that I had to go and learn and tease apart this kind of idea of, and then work on it for many years, and then actually see Steve, an expert who had done it for 30 years before, who had learned through all those failures, and go, talk about the why, talk about the customer journey, talk about all those touch points, not just about the features and the geeky fun things in the product.
Yeah. Write the press release first. I mean, there are different versions of it in different lines of work, but it's a really valuable theory.
Most startups and most companies, big companies in technology, don't do that.
Yeah. So I said before, Walter talks about the idea that intelligence isn't enough, right? Even extreme intelligence, as you agree with. You also talk about the idea that ideas aren't enough, right? And that you really have to build teams and work with people. Can you talk a little bit about what you think are the biggest mistakes people make in terms of dealing with other people? What are the biggest management mistakes? What are the biggest mistakes in terms of dealing with colleagues? What are the how could we all be better at what we do and what we're trying to accomplish by avoiding some of the common mistakes of angering or disappointing our fellow human beings?
As a leader or as an individual contributor?
Maybe let's do both.
Okay. As an individual contributor, it's again in the book, when you're inside an organization, any kind of organization, you have a customer, you're going to supply whatever work product you have a customer for that. It may be inside the company or outside the company. The direct work you work on, there's some customer for it. And there's somebody who's supplying you something so you can do your work. So they have a customer and you're their customer. So the first thing you need to do as an individual contributor is literally go and talk to those people who are your customers or you are a customer for someone, right? And learn about what they're doing and why they're doing it, why it matters, and continue to branch out from there. because those people have customers too, and so on and so forth. So if you can go through that, you can get a better sense for how you make decisions, because you start to learn about the different ways other people need to make their decisions, and you can start to come together to solve problems that are across the functional silos inside of organizations. And that's really important. And there's even silos inside of engineering too, whether it's testing or software or hardware or whatever. And they have to come together to really understand what each other needs to make a much better product for the customer. So that's one thing, is to get to know that customer base and be friends with them and understand how they think and their nomenclatures and stuff like that. That's one. The second one is make sure you understand why you're building what you're building. Make sure you're on a mission. What's that mission? And make sure that you have product marketing, the voice of the customer inside your organization. So back in the 80s, and this was actually at the Aspen Ideas Festival a long time ago, we used to talk about design. And we said, design, there's not enough design inside of our organizations. Design used to be called mechanical engineering, really. It would be part, oh, we'll select this color and this material, whatever. And then we said, oh no, design is really important because it's so visceral to the customer that we need to elevate that. It's not just something down here, it's as important as engineering, sales, what have you. So we elevated design to the executive ranks. And with that, we saw a whole new way of thinking. Most companies today have that. But what we also need, design is not voice of the customer. You still need the voice of the customer, and it needs to be elevated to the same thing as design, engineering, marketing, all that other stuff. Apple has that. Most companies do not. And you need to have that voice, and it has to be at the highest level. Nobody really works for them, and again, there's a whole chapter on that in here. If you have the voice of the customer and they're inside of every meeting, whether that's sales, customer support, marketing, engineering, product design, all that stuff, then you always have someone reminding you, think about the customer. You need to have that inside your organization so you can really pull everyone together and make sure that everyone understands why we're building this, what's important to that customer, and make decisions around that, as opposed to, oh, I want to do this now, and that seems like fun or whatever. You always remember who you're ultimately selling it for, and you need to have that all the way at the highest ranks of the company.
And obviously some of that is...
And there it is. Oh, there's product management, and it's there on the screen. So, go ahead.
Obviously some of that second point is relevant to leadership, but you started on the individual contributors.
Yeah, so let's talk about the leadership side. So on leadership side, there is a different way, you have to understand there are two different types of decisions that you're going to make when you're doing something new and very different. There are opinion-based decisions and there are data-driven decisions, okay? Opinion, when you're doing something totally new, especially version 1, if it's revolutionary, nobody is an expert at it. You're not going to be able to go get data for it. Like, we didn't know whether we should put a keyboard, physical keyboard on this or a virtual keyboard on this. It was a huge kind of, discussion for multiple months. Put it all here in the book as well. But it was an opinion-based decision. There was no data we were going to get, and actually we had counter data to that, which was the Crackberry, the BlackBerry. The most popular communications device at the time was BlackBerry that had a touch keyboard, right? A real physical keyboard. And we had people inside the organization saying, we cannot ship a phone without that. Because if we do, we're going to be laughed at. Because people really have gotten used to it. But then we worked through all of the data, and ultimately it was an opinion-based decision that said, no, we're going to do this with a virtual keyboard. We knew that the virtual keyboard worked well enough. It wouldn't be as good as a physical one, but it would work well enough. And we said, we're going to go for it. And it was the case where Steve making that opinion-based decision, saying that's the way we're going to go, and that's it. The same thing happened with the cover for this. We had all agreed 18 months before we shipped it that this was going to have a plastic front. It was going to have a plastic front because we're worried people are going to drop it all the time. You drop your phones, right? So you don't want that to break. So we're going to have a plastic cover. Well, we all went down the road, and then when we announced it and we showed the world, and people said, well, what's the cover? And they said, well, we said it's plastic. And they said, plastic? How can you have plastic? It's going to scratch so easily with keys and everything. We said, yeah, but at least it's not going to break. And then we changed our thoughts on this. And we said, wait a second. No, we need to have glass, because glass won't scratch. It'll be better to touch and that kind of stuff.
It's so much more pleasing to touch
It's so much
glass
more
than
pleasing.
plastic.
But here's the mental flip. The mental flip is if we put plastic on it and it's just in your pocket and it scratches, you blame us for making a bad design decision. But if we put glass on it and you drop it, it's your problem. So you can't blame us for a bad design because you got what you wanted, you just got to take better care of it. So these are the kind of things, and that was another opinion-based decision that was kind of, when we got a little bit of data from smart people, but at the end of the day, it was another opinion-based thing, and we had to work like hell for 5 months to redo the entire design to ship it 15 years ago today. Right? So you got to really know the difference between opinion-based decisions and data-driven decisions, and if it's V1, a version 1 of anything, it's going to be a lot of opinion, and don't go try to get data. And what do most people do? Most people, most large companies, even small companies, investors do this. What do? They go, well, we want to make sure this new product is going to be a success. We don't want to have a problem because I want to get my bonus. I want to make sure I'm going to stay CEO, blah, blah, blah. So what do? They hire management consultants. You tell them what you want. You spend a ton of money, and they take your opinions, wrap some data around it, and give it back to you and say, ha-ha, you now have data. And now if you make a mistake, it was the management consultant's fault. All right? So I don't like management consultants, if you couldn't tell.
Evidently.
So, but that's really what happens, and this happens time and again and time and again. And these big companies, these small companies, they don't flex their gut, the muscle in their gut to start to understand opinion-based decisions and what it takes to make those decisions and put it out there. And okay, we might fail, but we're going to learn, and we'll then, and we'll revise it from there.
And another mistake that I've seen, and it's very tempting to make this mistake, is when you need to make a big decision, and there is some data, you put too much weight on that data.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And you sort of fool yourself into thinking that this is a data-based decision rather than an opinion one. And with apologies for the second journalism reference here, I write an email newsletter that goes out to lots of Times readers every morning. The data I would love is how much time do people spend with different parts of the newsletter. That data doesn't exist because, as bad as privacy may be, we can't see into your inbox. We don't know, are you spending more time with the first half of the email or the second? We don't know it. And so what is tempting is to put too much weight on the what you click on. But we don't actually, that's not the primary thing we care about. The primary thing we care about is, did you spend 10 minutes with the top of the email and no minutes with the bottom, or vice versa? And I constantly notice that we're tempted to say, but we have this click data, which doesn't answer the question. And we have to make opinion-based decisions, and we just got to own them.
You got to own them.
Maybe they'll fail, maybe they'll succeed.
And then you learn from them, and then you keep, revising after them. But so this is that crisis that we have, especially when we talk about data, we need more and more and more data. We get so crazy that we lose the script. We lose what our agency is, and that we have to make decisions, and that's how we get new things. Because we're only taking data on old things, not new things.
Right. So let's broaden it a little bit before we open it up to the crowd. So in many ways, the American economy has been extremely successful over the past generation. You've been involved in some of the most famous successes. Innovations. You think about companies like Google, Alphabet, Apple. Many of these companies are American companies. But in other ways, our society hasn't been that successful over the last generation. By some of the most fundamental measures, life expectancy has stagnated. It has fallen for working class people who don't have a college degree. I'm interested, you've thought so much about innovation. How can our society do a better job of producing innovations that maybe are profitable or maybe are not, but that definitely deliver rising living standards for the masses of people? Why are we falling short there, and how can we change things to do better?
Well, it is a undiscovered or unloved set of companies by the media, but there are companies out there, and we've funded many of them, who can help to bring small farmers, medium-sized farmers, and have them compete with big ag through technology and through financing. And so there are those things. We have a company in Indonesia. We have 2 companies in Indonesia and Southeast Asia that all about either shellfish farming or fishing, open line fishing, and where we have broken the back of big fish. And we've gotten them better prices. We've gotten them technology to help them find, to grow their crops more sustainably. And they can grow their businesses when we combine it with financing. So we don't need all the, what we try to tend to do too much, especially with the media, is we focus on the cool technology, not the why again. And if you look at the why and you see how many aquaculture farmers out there, or businesses out there around. We're in Ecuador now, and we're in Latin America, Africa, all over Southeast Asia, India. We're serving 50 to 100,000 family farms doing this stuff with technology, using their phone, a little bit of sensors, and this way we've broken the back of this, logistics chain. So they're talking directly to the retailers here with a better crop. And you can do that. It's not the sexiest tech, but when you combine all the pieces together, you can lift people up. That's one thing. We have other things, which is microloans and that kind of stuff for just general public. We have other things where we don't have credit scores. Like we know what credit scores are. Europe has credit scores, but in Southeast Asia they don't. If you look at Southeast Asia, they're the biggest loan that they take out in their life is not for their house or anything like that. It's just for the scooter. A 2-wheel scooter. That's like $2,000. So they can get around, they can take their kids wherever they go work back and forth, or maybe it is their job, they're delivering or whatever. They don't have enough money for that $2,000 scooter. So what do? They get a loan. And that loan is at 40 to 45% APR. It's crazy. So what we do is we sit there and we bring technology, we hook it up to their phone, we see if they can pay their phone bill, we see certain things, and we give them these small loans and they get it at 18 to 20% kind of APRs, and we help them on board to get that stuff. So again, not the sexy stuff, but it's really important, and we only give them the financing if they get an electric version of the scooter, not a gas version.
Well, that actually.
So these are the kind of things that you can help nudge people along and give them a better product and help them with their family.
I want to finish by asking about 2 specific societal problems: climate change, which you just alluded to.
Yeah.
I know it's something you're concerned about. Do we need? Is this something the private sector can do alone? Do we need much bolder government action? What do you want to see happen on climate change?
So I was actually with the head of the EPA this morning. I was with Al Gore yesterday. We're working on climate change all the time. And actually, if you look here at the last page of the book, we have sustainability information. You might have saw it up there. Sustainability information for the book, where everything came from, how it was made, what you do at end of life, and carbon footprint and everything right here. Trying to give transparency to this. So we care about climate change. And so when I look out at all the companies that we've invested in, we're next generation electric motors, next generation batteries, silicon, switches, we're in wireless charging, grid level battery storage, small modular nuclear reactors, these kinds of things. When I look out, and I'm working with these entrepreneurs, and we're seeing things 5, 10, and 15 years in the future, and we're working on them now, we don't have a technology problem. We have the technology we need to solve climate change. We don't have the will. That's the problem.
What do you mean the will?
The will, the governmental will. We don't have people working on this and understanding. They think that someone else is going to solve it. I look at it and I go to many of these audiences and I go, look, if you're not doing something about climate change to improve how you live on this planet, whether professionally or personally, you're part of the problem, not part of the solution. You can't be apathetic, you can't be indifferent. Because if you are, you're part of the problem. To be part of the solution means you're doing something. It doesn't mean you're going to go run out and make a solar panel factory. What are you doing in your businesses to encourage to be more green? We need to be working on this, because the more people who rise up, more people who actually go and engage, we get more volume or more people saying that, and more money and businesses go target that.
And
right?
when you say the government will, is that a reference to the government should be making the polluting energy more expensive so we can make the transition more quickly?
Yeah, so let's just talk about in Europe, because I've lived in Paris now for 7 years. I left the US. And so there we're putting in a carbon border tax. Anything that comes in from and imported into the European Union, if you do not have carbon accounting, all the externalities put into your price, and you know it's there, you're going to get taxed. Because all the companies who are producing goods inside of the EU region have to already put in these externalities into their balance sheets. So if you want to import from China, and they don't have a carbon tax, they're going to be taxed, and that money is going to go directly into putting into climate change solutions, right? Yesterday or 2 days ago, the EU ratified by 2035 all internal combustion light vehicles and passenger vehicles are banned from sales by 2035. That's called will, right? When you put in the European Union, when you build a battery factory, at the very same time you have to build a battery recycling factory. Okay? It's called thinking about it in a systemic way. Not just, oh, we need a battery factory, and then you're like, oh, now we have all these batteries, and what are we going to do with them? No, you got to build the battery cycle at the same time. So the will is about doing these kinds of things, and I know it's hard, but that's what it takes to get those nudges to go in the right, to get everybody moving in the right direction. And also, it's going to force change back in China and anyone else who wants to import into the EU, which I think is phenomenal.
The consequences are already terrible, and they will become much worse if we don't.
Absolutely.
I'm going to get to questions. I promised I was going to ask you this, so let's see if we can do this in like a minute or two. Do we spend too much time on our phones?
The phone, the iPhone, your smartphone, whatever it is, it's just a refrigerator. It's just a refrigerator. You can choose to put what you want in the refrigerator or not put in it. You could put in good apps, or you could put in bad apps. You can overconsume good apps. You can overconsume bad apps. It's no different than a refrigerator, okay? How do you want to eat? How do you want to digitally eat? So it's up to our choices, and we have to make good choices. What we have to have are tools. We have to have a digital scale, right? Screen time. I went off and I screamed about all kinds of, we don't have any information. How much do I use my phone every day or use my digital tools every day? I want to see my digital consumption habits. Just like we have, we can count calories. Well, we need to be able to count minutes spent on different good and bad things. Just like we have digital scales for our weight, or we have weight scales, we want digital scales for our consumption. We have nutritional labels on our food to tell us what's in it and what's not. We need to have more of those for what we're consuming digitally so we can make better decisions. And the other thing is we need controls, either for ourselves or for our loved ones, our kids or what have you, to be able to make sure they're not getting into the wrong content or what have you. So, but it's incumbent on each of us to choose what it is we want, right? And we can be morbidly obese with digital if you want to. No one's going to stop you from that. But we have to, we're going to have to make good decisions. That being said, the tools are getting better. We're not there yet. Yes, there are apps out there that are really harmful. And I do think they do need to be regulated, but we're not even being transparent enough about that stuff today, and we need to.
What kinds of apps are harmful?
What kind of apps are harmful?
Yeah.
Anything that really, gets into our brain and it hijacks our system. Reels on Instagram, TikTok, even dating for that matter. Tinder, what have you. My friend's the CEO of Tinder, so Renata, love you. So we have to be able to modulate, and we have to have the tools, and companies like Apple and Google who run these platforms have to give us those tools to allow us to do it. And the other thing is, if you have kids, digital addiction is real for adults as well as kids. I know firsthand. I've had experiences. I know it. And so if you are telling your kids not to use it very much, but you're using it, you're a damn hypocrite. So put your phone away when you're at the table. Put your phone away. Look people in the eyes. Make your kids do it. None of that stuff. Like, start thinking about real ways of socially integrating digital technology in a healthy way. But don't be a hypocrite.
There's a father figure in my family. He's no longer alive. He lived a very long, wonderful life, named Sidney Korsnick. And he said, your children will listen to you less than you hope and imitate you more than you ever imagine, which is a version of what he said.
Exactly.
We still have a nice amount of time for questions. We're going to start here with Gary in the front. As I said, we've got just a wonderful audience here. So let's try to get to as many of you as possible.
So I seem to recall that after you launched the Nest thermostat, that the incumbent, Honeywell, attacked you.
Yes.
Could you discuss that? Because the innovator versus incumbent battle is one, as a venture capitalist, that I think a lot about.
Okay. Well, there's a whole chapter called Lawyer Up in the book, and it goes into that. But look, first thing is, if you're doing anything revolutionary and you're going to unseat the incumbents, the first thing they're going to do is laugh at you. The second thing is they're going to do is get angry and try to stop you in the channel some way. And the third thing they're going to do is sue you. It always happens. iPod, we were laughed at by Microsoft and other people. Then they got angry, and then we got sued. iPhone, same thing. Nest, thermostat, same thing. If you're doing something that's going to cause that, you're like, oh. It's frightening. So I remember when we got sued at Nest, because we were not part of Apple, right? We're sued at Nest, we're an independent thing. All my investors are calling me like, what are we gonna do? And I'm like, running through the hallways cheering. I'm like, we're getting sued, this is awesome. Why? Because we know we're threatening them in a fundamental way that we are going to be successful. And that's amazing. You just have to have the right lawyers around you, and you can stave them off. You have to have enough money and all those other things, but you have to have your patent portfolio as well. But when you're doing that and you do get sued, and we got sued for bullshit reasons as well, it means you're on the right thing, and investors should see that and make sure you do the lawsuits efficiently, but don't get too scared about it, because it means you really are threatening them in a major way, and that's wonderful, because you're on the right track.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the presentation. My question is regarding the phone and what you were saying earlier about making sure that whatever kind of product we produce addresses the different pain points, that should be the motivating kind of why, about why it has a particular feature set. And, I use an iPhone, obviously. And I have to say that, there have been many times throughout the lifespan of the iPhone that it's implemented a lot of features that have been very impractical. You talked about the glass versus the plastic thing, but then also like the proprietary charging system, the removal of the headphone jack, the fact that when it came out, smartphones weren't even like a thing, right? Like culturally, it just created all of these different new ways of thinking about how we relate to our devices.
Right.
So is there like a department at Apple that thinks about these things like from a cultural basis as well as from a design thinking basis to say, well, yeah, this is pretty impractical, but we're going to put it into the phone anyway because 2 years from now, this is going to be the new thing and this is just the way everybody's going to do it?
Thank you.
Good question. At Apple, when I was there, I don't know what's happened over the last 10, 12 years now. I don't know if the team's there, but there was no team when we were doing this. Right? We were still small. The Apple, when we did the iPod, it was 4,000 people, and Apple was kind of underwater. It was lucky if it was break even. But you would need to think more and more about that. But the reason why there's a different connector was USB-C didn't exist yet, and all the other connectors were really bad. So it's just a legacy thing, and you kind of, well, it's nice to have the legacy thing because it's unique. And now, Brazil's even saying you're forcing the iPhone to go to USB-C. So some of that stuff is just business tactics, in a way. But there's other things that, I don't know if you remember the Taptic interface that was on the iPhone, that you'd press it and go zzz, was kind of a different buzzer. Well, they got rid of it. They put it in and they got rid of it. They said that wasn't smart. If you remember the touch bar now on the Mac Pros, they're all gone now. Got
rid of the home button.
Yeah. So look, sometimes you try stuff, even in the iPod. I did 18 generations of the iPod, and there were a couple of generations of the iPod. We tried some new things we thought were going to be good, but didn't, and we killed them, the next generation and the one afterwards. So you got to try things, and sometimes you're not always going to do the right thing, right? And then other things are for business purposes. But I do think that overall, Apple makes pretty dang good decisions on the whole. And sometimes they make mistakes. If you're not making mistakes, you're not trying hard enough. If you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. And you're not going to do anything that's changing the world.
Yes, please.
Nope, here comes that mic.
So I have a non-intellectual question,
Okay,
and it is a two-part question.
okay.
So if the first part is such that I don't have to ask second
Okay.
part, so then it will be only one part.
Okay.
What kind of watch are you wearing?
This watch, this is called a Relentless from Belgium.
Why isn't an Apple Watch?
Why isn't it an Apple Watch? To me, to be honest, Apple Watches are accessories, they're not products. And they're sensors with a screen, and I don't want another screen and another thing to charge. So I'm a watch lover. To be honest, I'm an absolute watch lover, collector, and the Apple Watch doesn't do it for me.
Can I just say that was the most impressively succinct two-part question I've ever
Go Blue, Tony. I have a question for you around, as a builder, how do you get better at saying no to yourself? Forget about everybody else, but like, I have these 100 other great ideas, but I'm not going to do them. How do you get good at that? How do you focus?
So great question. The big thing here is you have to understand if you've done anything at a world-class level and the amount of time and attention it takes to doing that right, you can easily go off and be distracted by many things, but then you don't have enough time to do one thing right. It's about focus, and that's what Steve told me. You have to say no a lot so that the one time you say yes, it means a lot. It's like saying yes to lots of partners in your life. You know, it's like, oh yeah, yes to you and yes to you and yes to you. You got to say no to a lot of people before you get married. Otherwise, you're gonna, you're not gonna really focus, right? So it's kind of the same thing.
We went. Can we get the mic up here? I'm going to ask a very quick question.
Yeah, we have 3 minutes
We
left?
we went on vacation in another country. We rented an old car. There was no way to plug in our phones. We listened to the radio. And
Oh my God.
one of my sons said, "This was great. We didn't pick what songs we were listening to. It was just discovery." Do you ever miss the old world, and do you try to recreate it in ways?
Oh, I have a great app on my phone. It's the best radio stations in the world. It's called FIP, F-I-P.
So you don't pick the songs.
It's all human curated, and it's an app, it's free, advertiser free, and you just listen to the best tunes, and it's all not the top 40 or whatever. It is deep, good cuts, and 8 different genres. And when you're in France, you can listen to it on the radio, but you get one of the channels. But if you get FIP on your phone or on your whatever, it's amazing.
Great.
So yeah, I'm always looking for discovery of new things.
First of all, this conversation's been fantastic, and I'm going to throw
Thank
away
you.
my Apple Watch.
Okay.
My question is, as an observer and builder of many products, what are one or a couple that you think are going to have a significant impact that people may not see today?
That people don't see today. And they probably might not see it. So we have a company called Menlo Micro. And that company, we've been now working with them 7 or 8 years. And so they're before the transistor. You know what, everybody knows what a transistor is? There's the things that's lots of them, billions of them inside of here. Well, before the transistor, there was the vacuum tube. And the vacuum tube got replaced by the transistor, and that's why we have all this stuff of digital around us because of the transistor. There's another technology that got invented around the time of the vacuum tube. That's called a relay. And it just opens and closes a switch remotely. It has not been innovated since the 1880s. This company's been working on it, first was spun out of GE for 40 years. They finally made a silicon relay. It's as important as a transistor is to the world. We can now, with this silicon relay, remove tons and tons of inefficiencies in our wireless networks as well as our electricity networks. 60% of all the energy generated or produced on this planet is wasted. 60% of all the energy we produce today is wasted, okay? So with this switch, in India, just in India, 6 to 8% of all electricity produced is consumed by ceiling fans, home ceiling fans. 6 to 8% by home ceiling. If you add our one switch to it, just to the control box, it goes from 6 to 8% to 3 to 4%. So now we've just saved 3 to 4% of the entire energy consumption of India with one digital part, one silicon part relay. That's the kind of stuff that we invest in all the time. We do diamonds without mines. We do meat without cow. We were one of the first investors in Possible Foods. We do stuff that is really there. It may not be like a gadget thing, but it really is important for what we have to do to meet the climate crisis head on that we created. So it's stuff like that.
This has been great fun, but I'm looking at a big red zero.
Yeah, we're
I
sorry.
know
We're
there
getting
are
the
more
hook.
questions.
We're getting the hook.
You are going to sign books.
Yeah,
So if you
right
brought
over
a
there.
copy, or if you don't have one and want to buy a copy, and if I didn't get your question, I apologize. You can ask it
You can ask
quickly
me over there.
while Tony's signing your book. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you.